Blood poured from the cut on her face as Freya Thordóttir, the Berserker, knelt before the tribal council, her hands bound with rough ropes. Her enemy lover, Kára Olafsdóttir, screamed as she was dragged away by warriors of the Raven clan. "Exile or death," thundered the Jarl, as the crowd roared in approval. In that moment, Freya knew her love had cost everything, and that the price would echo for generations. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the fierce and complicated world of Viking honor and love. This channel is just beginning, and every subscription means the world to us. It's what keeps this project alive. If you enjoy the story, please consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to connect with you. Your support helps us reach our first 1,000 subscribers and bring more powerful stories to life. The cold crept through the cracks of Freya's small cabin, nestled at the edge of the dense forest that bordered the Raven clan's lands. It was a merciless dawn, the kind that bit with the sharpness of a freshly forged blade, leaving no sanctuary even within the thick walls of hides and timbers. The icy breath of winter hung heavy in the air, and frost clung stubbornly to the thin panes of stretched animal skin that served as windows. Outside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the occasional whispered rustle of dry branches swaying under the weight of a recent snow. Freya Thordóttir stirred beneath her coarse wool blanket, the faint glow of embers dimming in the hearth casting long shadows across her rugged features. She was 32 winters old, her body carved by countless battles and raw survival. Even in sleep, the warrior's muscles tensed with the memory of war, the relentless dance between life and death that had become her existence. The scent of damp earth and burned wood mingled with the faint sharpness of pine resin, a smell she had come to associate with these isolated borderlands. She opened her eyes slowly, the sharp green depths adjusting to the low light. Her gaze, usually fierce and calculating, softened for a moment as she surveyed the humble space around her. The cabin was spare, with only the necessities, a wooden table scarred by years of use, a rack holding her weapons, her trusted two-bladed axe resting quietly, skins for warmth, and a small pile of gathered herbs carefully stored in woven baskets. Every item bore signs of use and care, a reflection of her disciplined life. Outside, the first pale fingers of dawn began to pry at the horizon, tainting the sky with muted shades of gray and rose. The world was still cloaked in winter's grasp, the snow layer undisturbed except for a few animal tracks leading into the forest's shadowed depths. Freya's breath fogged in the chilled air as she swung her legs over the edge of the bed. Every movement was measured, mindful of the aches that lingered from yesterday's training. Her arms, marked with crescent scars and jagged lines like ancient runes, flexed unconsciously. The tattoo of the bear, her Berserker mark, spread in blackened ink from her neck down over her right shoulder, a symbol that bound her to a power both feared and revered. She rose, the rough wool of her tunic brushing against her skin, and moved toward the small fire pit. With practiced hands, she coaxed the embers back to life, the orange glow filling the cabin with reluctant warmth. The bitter cold outside was a constant reminder of the harshness of the world she inhabited, a world that valued strength above all else. Yet beneath the armor and the fierce reputation, Freya carried a quiet loneliness. Her fury in battle was matched only by the solitude that clung to her like a second skin. Her morning ritual began with the bitter tea brewed from a blend of forest mushrooms and bitter herbs. She poured the steaming liquid into a small wooden cup, the strong, earthy aroma filling the cramped space. The taste was sharp and disagreeable, yet it was essential, a means to temper the berserker fire that roared within her blood. Without it, she risked losing control, becoming the wild beast that legend spoke of with fear and awe. As the warmth of the tea spread through her chest, Freya allowed herself a moment to reflect. The clan had come to respect her, despite her being a woman in a realm dominated by men. The Jarl himself, Gunnar Sigurdsson, bore a grudging respect for her prowess. Yet, respect was a fragile shield in their world, and beneath it lay suspicion. Berserkers were unpredictable, their spirits wild and untamable. They were both warriors and omens, their presence stirring unease even among allies. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the thin walls of her cabin. Freya wrapped her leather cloak tightly around her shoulders, the weight of iron plates sewn into it a familiar comfort. Each piece of her gear told a story, battles fought, wounds survived, victories earned. The cold bit at her exposed skin as she stepped outside, the crunch of snow beneath her boots echoing through the stillness. The village lay a short distance away, a cluster of wooden longhouses encircled by palisades topped with sharpened stakes. Smoke spiraled lazily from chimneys, promising warmth and life within. Yet Freya felt a disconnect from it all, as if she stood at the edge of two worlds, the ordered routine of the clan and the wild wilderness beyond. Her breath came in steady puffs, mingling with the crisp morning air. The sky was still a pale, uncertain gray, the sun hidden behind thick clouds that promised more snow to come. Trees stood like silent sentinels, their bare branches etched against the sky, and the forest floor was a mosaic of white and shadow. Freya's hand rested on the haft of her axe as she made her way toward the clearing where she trained. The muscles in her arms and shoulders tightened in anticipation, the pulse of battle stirring faintly in her veins even on this cold morning. She had always found solace in the rhythm of combat, the sound of steel striking wood, the smell of fresh sap, the sharp tang of sweat and blood mingling in the air. Reaching the ancient oak tree that bore the scars of countless strikes, she raised her axe high and brought it down with a force that shook the ground. The impact sent a shiver up her arm, raw and satisfying. She repeated the movement again and again, each blow a release of the tension that gnawed at her spirit. Around her, the world seemed to hold its breath, the snow muffling all sound except the heavy thud of her weapon. The eyes of the village watched from a distance. Some held admiration, others wariness. Freya was a paradox, respected for her might, feared for the savage power she could unleash. Her reputation was forged not only by her blood-stained victories, but by the wild frenzy she summoned in battle, an ancient rage that set her apart even from her fellow warriors. The weight of that alone was a burden she bore silently. She was a berserker, a warrior whose fury was both her greatest weapon and her gravest curse. It was a path few could understand, and fewer still would follow. As the sun climbed higher, Freya's training slowed. She wiped the sweat and snow from her brow, her breath steadying in the cold air. Her mind drifted to the borderlands, the contested forest between the Raven and Bear clans. It was a dangerous place, where alliances shifted like the wind, and every shadow could hide a deadly enemy. Hunters from both clans prowled those woods, wary and watchful. The bears and ravens had been locked in bitter conflict for generations, their hatred a legacy carved into the land itself. Battles had been fought over every hill, every stream, every patch of fertile soil. It was a cycle of violence as old as memory, fueled by honor, revenge, and the unyielding need to protect one's people. Freya's thoughts returned to her place within this world. Though fierce in battle, she was also bound by rules, of loyalty, of clan, of the unspoken codes that governed their lives. To cross those lines meant death, exile, or worse. Love between enemies was unthinkable, a betrayal that could unravel everything. Yet despite the clarity of these laws, a part of her longed for something beyond the endless struggle, a connection deeper than battle cries and bloodshed. Later that morning, Freya prepared for the hunt. She donned her heavy cloak, the bear tattoo beneath seeming to pulse with a life of its own beneath her skin. Her leather boots crunched softly as she stepped out into the light that had grown. She paused by a frozen stream. The ice cracked and jagged beneath her fingers. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the water, a fierce woman marked by scars and fire, her gaze unwavering. Here, amid the silence of the forest, she was both hunter and hunted, warrior and exile in waiting. Freya's thoughts turned again to the clans, their endless feud, the ancient grudges that held them captive. The Bear clan, fierce and proud, ruled the lands just beyond the forest. Their symbol was the great bear, strong and relentless, much like the warriors who bore that name. The Raven clan, to which Freya belonged, was cunning and fierce, their black feathers a mark of both death and protection. In this borderland between clans, every choice carried weight. Every encounter held the potential for bloodshed. Freya knew that one misstep could mean the end, not only of her life, but of everything she had fought to protect. Yet that morning, as the wind whispered through the trees and snowflakes danced like restless spirits in the pale light, Freya felt a stirring within her, a shift she could not yet name. It was the beginning of something new, fragile and dangerous, like the first breath of spring after a long winter. And it was a choice that would change the course of her life forever. The forest held its breath beneath a blanket of gathering snow, the pale light fading as heavy clouds swallowed the winter sky. The trees stood like ancient sentinels, their branches bending under the weight of ice, their bark rough and silent. Freya's breath came steady but shallow, each exhale a small mist that quickly dissolved into the cold air. She moved with the practiced caution of a hunter, the world around her shrinking to the careful rhythm of her footsteps against the frozen earth. The weight of her axe on her shoulder was a familiar comfort, its cold iron a reminder of the fight she carried within. Yet, despite the steady solidity of her weapon, a restless tension gnawed at her, an unease born not of the forest's dangers, but of the fragile line she walked between duty and desire. Her eyes flicked to the shadows, searching for signs of movement. The forest was no stranger to violence, to the harshness born of clan rivalries and survival. But in the midst of that cold, relentless world, something unexpected stirred. A faint sound reached her ears, soft, uneven, almost desperate. Freya froze, muscles taut. The noise came again, a whisper of movement, a stifled breath carried faintly on the wind. Her heart quickened, the steady beat of her berserker's pulse rising beneath her skin. She stepped carefully toward the source, the snow muffling her approach. There, tangled among the frozen underbrush and fallen branches, a figure crouched, barely visible beneath ragged furs and blood-stained cloth. The woman's face was pale and streaked with grime, her eyes wide and feverish, reflecting the dim light like shards of ice. A low, pained groan escaped her lips. Freya's hand instinctively moved to the haft of her axe, fingers tightening around the worn wood. The instinct to strike was strong, a reflex born of years of war and hardship. But as her eyes took in the woman's condition, something else stirred deep within her. This was no enemy in full battle armor, no hardened warrior poised for attack. This was fragility, vulnerability, humanity laid bare in the cold wilderness. The woman's cloak bore a brooch shaped like a bear, its bronze edges dulled by wear. The unmistakable sigil of the Bear clan. Freya's breath caught. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath alongside her. The line between friend and foe blurred in the frost-bitten silence. Should I? She whispered to herself, the conflict rising like a storm in her chest. To leave her here meant certain death, whether by the forest's merciless hand or the ruthless vigilance of her own people. To help her was to invite danger, betrayal, scorn. Her mind raced through the consequences. The code of the clans was clear and uncompromising. Love for the enemy was treason. Mercy was a weakness. The weight of generations of hatred pressed down on her shoulders as heavily as the snow on the boughs above. Yet as she knelt beside the woman, her hands moving carefully to examine the wounds, recognition softened the harsh edge of duty. The woman didn't plead for mercy. There was a quiet strength in her pain, a dignity that refused to be crushed by circumstance. "Who are you?" Freya asked, voice low but steady. The woman's lips parted in a weak smile, a flicker of defiance in eyes that had seen too much. "Kára Olafsdóttir," she whispered, "healer of the bears." The name echoed in Freya's mind, stirring memories of battles fought and lives lost on both sides. Yet it was not the name that held her. It was the look in Kára's eyes, the unyielding spirit beneath the blood and dirt. Freya's fingers moved to free the woman's trapped arm, careful not to cause more pain. The broken limb was unmistakable, swollen and crooked beneath the torn fabric. The deep cut in her leg oozed dark blood, staining the snow beneath them. Awareness flickered in Freya's gaze. "Why are you here, wounded and alone? Did your people abandon you?" Kára's breath hitched, but her voice held steady. "I was caught in the skirmish. Fleeing. They saw me as a sacrifice." The weight of betrayal hung heavy in the air. Freya's heart clenched, not for herself, but for the woman before her. The knowledge that even among one's own, loyalty could fracture. "Come," Freya said, voice resolute despite the turmoil inside. "I will not let you die here." The words felt like a breaking of ancient laws, a crossing of invisible boundaries that had long dictated the lives of those born into these clans. Yet, beneath the layers of ice and blood, something tender and stubborn took root. Supporting Kára's frail body, Freya lifted her with care, each movement deliberate to ease the pain. The forest seemed to watch, silent and unyielding, as they made their slow, precarious way to a hidden cave she knew nearby, a shelter carved out beneath a cluster of boulders, shielded from the biting wind. The journey was arduous. Kára's weight was a burden not just physical but emotional, a symbol of forbidden compassion that Freya carried with a fierce determination. The cold bit deeper as night fell, snow falling in thick, swirling curtains that blurred the world into shades of gray and white. Inside the cave, the flicker of a small fire cast dancing shadows on rough stone walls. Freya set Kára down gently, her hands working quickly to tend the wounds. She stripped torn fabric, washing cuts with water drawn from a nearby stream, then wrapped them carefully with strips of cloth torn from her own tunic. The broken arm was stabilized with splints fashioned from slender branches, tied firmly, but not tightly enough to cut off circulation. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and heated earth, mingling with the sharp tang of blood and a faint trace of herbs Freya carried, gifts from her mother, meant for healing though not often used by a berserker. Kára winced with each movement, but met Freya's gaze with a quiet gratitude. "Why do you help me?" she asked, voice hoarse. Freya's hands stilled for a moment, the question piercing the veil of certainty she had wrapped around herself. "Because," she said slowly, "sometimes the lines we draw are only as strong as the fear behind them. And sometimes the heart knows what the mind cannot bear." The words hung heavy between them, fragile as the frost outside. Night deepened, the storm outside growing in fury, trapping them together in a world apart from clan wars and blood vendettas. The fire's glow softened the cold edges of their reality, drawing out stories whispered in the dark. Kára spoke of her knowledge of herbs and the delicate art of healing, a gift rare and precious in a land ruled by steel and strength. Her voice carried a calm certainty, a steady beacon amid the chaos of their lives. She told of her family's struggles, the burdens borne by those who sought to mend rather than break. Freya listened, the fierce warrior's armor cracking beneath the weight of shared vulnerability. In turn, she spoke of battles waged with teeth and claw, of the berserker's rage that surged like a storm within her veins. She revealed the loneliness behind the legend, the isolation of a woman whose fury was both a weapon and a chain. As the hours passed, the distance between them dissolved in touches tentative. Freya tore a strip from her own woolen tunic, the coarse fabric rough against her fingers, and gently wiped the grime and dried blood from Kára's pale face. The skin was cold beneath her touch, almost translucent where the frostbite had crept. Yet the blue of Kára's eyes remained vivid, sharp, unyielding even through the haze of injury. They exchanged a glance, brief, electric. It was a moment suspended in time, filled with unspoken questions and cautious understanding. Freya's gaze softened, a rare tenderness touching the edges of her usually fierce expression. Kára's lips parted slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, her eyes sought something in Freya's, perhaps an anchor amid the storm raging both outside and within. Freya shifted, bringing her own cloak closer to wrap around Kára's shivering form. The warmth of the hide was meager against the cold that had settled in the healer's bones, but it was a promise, one of protection, of refuge, however fleeting. The two women sat close, the space between them narrowing with each passing breath. Silence wrapped around them, dense and heavy yet not uncomfortable. It was a shared quiet, woven from fear, pain, and the fragile threads of trust beginning to unfurl. The flickering firelight caught the curve of Kára's cheek, the delicate lines of her face hardened by suffering but not broken. Freya studied her, noting the faint scars etched along the healer's hands, burns from herbs, perhaps, or trials endured in service to her people. In the dim light, small movements spoke volumes. Kára's hand twitched as it rested against the cold stone, fingers curling instinctively toward Freya's steadying presence. The warrior's calloused palm hovered near, hesitant, before finally brushing against the healer's skin in a gesture of reassurance. The contact was fleeting, a spark igniting beneath layers of guarded silence. Freya reached into her small leather pouch, retrieving a handful of dried berries and roots she carried for emergencies. She crushed them between her fingers, releasing a faint, earthy aroma, and brewed a weak tea over the fire. The bitter scent filled the cave as she poured the steaming liquid into a wooden cup, careful not to spill the precious warmth. Kára's eyes followed every movement, curiosity flickering beneath the pain. When Freya lifted the cup to her lips, the healer's gaze softened, a silent plea shimmering in the depths. Freya offered the cup, and Kára accepted with trembling hands, sipping slowly. The warmth spread through her, a small comfort amid the chill that clung to her like a shroud. As the tea soothed the ache in her throat, Kára's breathing steadied, the tension in her body easing ever so slightly. Her fingers closed around the cup, knuckles white with effort, but there was a glimmer of life returning to those icy blue eyes. Freya watched, her own pulse easing in response. In this quiet exchange, something delicate had shifted, a mutual recognition that transcended words. The fire sputtered, its glow waning as the night deepened. Freya pulled a fur cloak over Kára's shoulders, adjusting it carefully to shield her from the cold drafts that sneaked through the cave's crevices. The healer's gaze flicked to the small bundle of herbs beside Freya's pack, then back to the warrior's face. There was a silent question, unspoken but clear. Freya dipped her fingers into a small pot of salve, the thick ointment made from crushed berries and pine resin, and began to gently rub it into the raw skin of Kára's leg. The healer tensed at first, then closed her eyes, surrendering to the careful ministrations. The pain was raw, but the touch was steady, deliberate, an unspoken promise that she was not alone. Kára's voice was a faint whisper, strained but steady. You carry the bear's mark on your arm, but your spirit is different. Freya glanced down at the dark tattoo, winding from her neck to shoulder, the stylized form of the bear etched in blackened ink. The bear's fury keeps me alive, she murmured, but it does not define me. A faint smile tugged at Kára's lips, fragile as the first thaw of spring. "I have seen rage born from pain," she said softly, "and strength that does not demand blood." Their eyes met again, and this time there was no hesitation, only a quiet acknowledgement of something profound unfolding between them. The barriers of clan and enmity seemed to blur, if only for this moment, in the shared humanity they discovered. Freya's thoughts drifted briefly to the rules that bound them, the laws etched into the very bones of their people. Love for the enemy was treason, a sin punished by exile or death. Yet here, in the circle of firelight, those ancient edicts felt distant, like echoes from a world that no longer held sway over their beating hearts. The night stretched on, marked only by the soft crackle of flames and the labored breath of the healer resting against her side. Freya kept watch, her eyes scanning the dark entrance of the cave, alert to any sign of danger. But more than that, her heart stayed close to the fragile warmth beside her, a beacon in a world built on steel and blood. Morning light would bring new challenges. The clans would not forget. The council would demand justice in harsh, unforgiving terms. Yet in this stolen time, there was peace, a brief reprieve from the endless cycle of hatred and war. And in that peace, a seed was planted. Freya reached out, her fingers brushing a stray lock of Kára's platinum hair from her pale face. The healer's eyes fluttered open, meeting the touch with a softness that belied the harshness of their world. For a heartbeat, the forest, the clans, the cold, all faded into shadow. When words finally came, they were quiet, almost reverent. "You saved me," Kára breathed. "Not because you had to, because you chose to." Freya's grip tightened, the weight of that truth settling deep within her. "And I would do it again," she said simply. "Because sometimes, what the heart chooses is stronger than any law." The storm outside began to wane, the wind's fury lessening as dawn approached. But inside the cave, a different kind of storm had taken hold, a quiet, fierce defiance that would echo far beyond this night. In that fragile space of firelight and whispered promises, Freya and Kára found something more enduring than the hatred that had shaped their lives, a bond forged not in battle, but in trust. And as the first rays of the pale sun crept across the frozen forest floor, the two women faced a future uncertain, bound together by a love that would defy the bitter cold of the world around them. The forest had barely begun to thaw when whispers of Freya's transgression seeped through the Raven clan like a poison. At first, they were mere murmurs, careful glances exchanged behind closed doors, furtive words hushed under breath. But those murmurs grew into a storm of suspicion and outrage, sweeping through the longhouses and palisades until there was no corner of the village untouched by the rumor. Freya felt the weight of those eyes on her before the council even convened. Every step she took toward the great hall was measured, her breath visible in the cold air, mingling with the sharp scent of smoke and sawdust. The faces she passed held a mixture of fear, contempt, and something darker, betrayal. The same warriors who had once nodded in respect now averted their gazes or whispered curses, as though her very presence threatened the fragile order they clung to. Inside the hall, the fire's glow did little to warm the tension that coiled like a serpent among the gathered. The Jarl sat heavy upon his carved wooden throne, his gray eyes colder than the winter sky. Beside him, warriors and elders crowded the benches, their expressions grim. The air was thick with the scent of sweat, leather, and the faint metallic tang of anticipation. Bjorn Halfdan prowled near the entrance, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with a storm of emotions Freya dared not decode. His presence was a constant reminder of the peril she faced, not only from the council's judgment, but from the unspoken rivalry simmering beneath the surface. He had followed her into the forest, had witnessed what should never have been seen, and now he wielded that knowledge like a weapon. When the Jarl finally spoke, his voice rose like thunder, silencing the murmurs. Freya Thordóttir, he began, his tone sharp and accusing. You have broken the sacred laws of our people. You have chosen the enemy over your own blood. The council's verdict was swift: exile. Death spared only because of her prowess in battle and the Jarl's grudging respect. But to live outside the clan's protection was a fate worse than death in these lands. The mark of exile was carved into her flesh, a rune burned into her cheek, a brand that would forever separate her from the only home she had ever known. As she was led from the hall, the weight of the world pressed upon her. The clan's people watched with hatred and sorrow, some hurling curses, others falling silent in shocked disbelief. Among the chaos, she caught a fleeting glance from Astrid, her old comrade, whose eyes held both sorrow and a spark of defiance. The exile was not only a punishment but a severing of ties, a statement that Freya was no longer one of them. The warriors who once fought by her side now turned their backs, their loyalty fractured by fear and tradition. Outside the village, the forest loomed, vast, cold, and unforgiving. But beyond the trees, even darker shadows gathered. Word of Freya's actions had spread beyond the Raven clan, reaching neighboring tribes and rival factions. Some whispered of opportunity, others of retribution. Hunters from the Bear clan prowled the borders, seeking their lost healer and eager to retrieve what was theirs. Scouts from other clans watched for signs of weakness among the Ravens, sensing the tremors of discord that could be exploited. Freya's exile was not only a personal punishment. It had become a spark that threatened to ignite old grudges anew. In the days that followed, Freya moved cautiously, her every step shadowed by the threat of discovery. The forest, once a refuge, now felt like a cage filled with unseen eyes. Her supplies dwindled, the cold gnawing at her bones, but her spirit remained unbroken. She found shelter where she could, in caves, beneath thick canopies of pines, in abandoned huts swallowed by snow. The land was harsh, and its silence was often broken by the distant howl of wolves or the crack of ice giving way underfoot. Her thoughts were consumed by Kára, the healer whose fate had become entwined with hers. The knowledge that Kára had been captured and sent back to the Bear clan haunted her. The risk to her beloved was a constant ache, a shadow that darkened every moment. More than once, Freya considered returning to the Raven village, to fight for her place, to plead for mercy. But the memory of the council's wrath, the jeering faces, and the Jarl's cold verdict steeled her resolve. There was no going back, not without risking everything they had both lost. Instead, Freya turned her gaze eastward, toward the lands beyond the mountains, where whispers spoke of traders and travelers who cared little for clan disputes. It was a perilous journey, but possibly the only path to survival and hope. Meanwhile, the Bear clan's camp buzzed with rumors and unease. Kára's return had not gone unnoticed, and questions swirled around her condition and the strange bond she now bore. The Carandra's silence about her time with Freya only deepened suspicion. Among the Bear warriors, there were those who demanded retribution. Others, less vocal yet equally watchful, sensed that Kára's ordeal might be more than a simple wound, that the seeds of a future unimagined had been planted in the darkest hours of that storm. In the Raven village, the cost of Freya's exile rippled through the community. The loss of a Berserker, a warrior of her caliber, was a blow to their strength and morale. Yet the need to uphold the clan's honor, to maintain the rigid codes that governed their world, outweighed any personal grief. Bjorn Halfdan's ambition grew with the shifting tides. He moved closer to the Jarl, positioning himself as a protector of tradition and a candidate for future leadership. His jealousy of Freya twisted into a fierce determination to eliminate any lingering threat she might pose. Astrid, torn between loyalty and conscience, wrestled with her own place in the unfolding drama. Her secret gift, a small dagger hidden in Freya's boots, was a thread of hope a lifeline thrown in defiance of the harsh judgments that had condemned her friend. As Winter's grip slowly loosened, the delicate balance of power trembled. The clans braced for what was to come, a reckoning forged in blood and betrayal, but also in the fragile promise of something new. Freya's exile was not merely an end. It was the beginning of a journey that would test the limits of loyalty, love, and the fierce hunger for survival. With every step she took into the unknown, she carried the weight of her choice, the forbidden love that had condemned her, and the hope that, perhaps, one day, it might also be the key to peace. The forest, once a maze of shadows, now held the distant light of possibility. Yet, lurking in that light were dangers both seen and unseen. Enemies who would stop at nothing to enforce the old laws, and allies whose true intentions remained shrouded in secrecy. Freya knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous. The clan's hatred was a wound deep and raw, unlikely to heal with time alone. But beneath the layers of pain and exile, a fragile flame glimmered, a spark born of defiance, of love, and of the unyielding human spirit. And it was that flame that would guide her through the darkness to come. The bloodied rune on Freya's cheek burned as fiercely as the fire in her chest. The cold wind gnawed at her skin, biting through the layers of worn furs and leather she carried like armor against the biting winter. She crouched low among the twisted roots of an ancient pine, the bitter scent of pine resin mixing with the iron tang of her own sweat. The forest, once a refuge, now felt like a prison, its shadows closing in around her as if whispering threats in the language of the old gods. Far beyond the thicket, the flicker of torches betrayed the approach of hunters. The raven warriors moved with grim purpose, their footsteps muffled by the fresh snow, but their intent unmistakable. At their head marched Jarl Gunnar Sigurdsson, his gray eyes cold and unyielding beneath the heavy brow. His cloak of wolf pelts flared with each measured step, silver chains clinking softly, the weight of his authority pressing upon the air like the winter itself. Behind him, Bjorn Halfdan's broad shoulders filled the path, his gaze burning with a mixture of anger and something more personal, jealousy, perhaps, or the bitter taste of rejection. The council's verdict had branded Freya a traitor, but the hunt was more than punishment. It was a statement, a cleansing fire to purge the stain of her forbidden love. Freya's breath came shallow and fast, clouds spilling from her lips in quick bursts. Time narrowed to the pulse in her ears, the crunch of snow beneath heavy boots, and the silent prayer to Odin that this night would not be her last. They found her as the moon climbed high, its pale light filtering through skeletal branches to fall in fractured shards across the frozen earth. The first torchlight caught the sharp edges of her axe, the blade gleaming like a sliver of ice. She rose slowly, muscles coiled and ready, eyes dark with the storm of her berserker fury barely restrained beneath the bitter tea's calm. Freya Thordóttir. The Jarl's voice cut through the stillness, heavy and final. You stand accused of treason against your blood. You consorted with the enemy, betrayed the Raven clan, and brought shame upon us all. Will you deny these charges, or embrace the punishment we offer? Freya's gaze met his without flinching. The fire in her eyes burned brighter than the torches. I do not deny what I did. I saved a life, not to dishonor my clan, but to honor what remains of our humanity. Bjorn stepped forward, a sneer twisting his lips. You speak of honor, yet consort with those who would see us broken. You would let our enemies walk free while you rot in exile. Such mercy is poison. Freya's jaw tightened, a muscle twitching beneath the scars. Mercy is not weakness. It is the strength to see beyond hatred. The Jarl's eyes narrowed, the weight of centuries pressing down in that harsh gaze. The law is the law, Freya. What you have done is unforgivable. Yet, because of your battle prowess, you will not die here tonight. Instead, you are to answer to the council in the great hall before the dawn. There, your fate will be sealed. The hunters closed in, their weapons raised, not in welcome, but in warning. Freya's pulse throbbed in her temples, the bitter sting of blood mingling with the roar of the berserker within. Freya's grip tightened on her axe. The berserker's spirit stirred, wild, untamed, ready to tear free. But beneath that fury lay something deeper, the fierce love that had shattered every rule, that had made her face this moment unbroken. "I will speak," she said through clenched teeth, "but not to beg. My truth will be spoken loud enough to shatter these walls." With a savage cry, Bjorn lunged forward, his heavy blade slicing through the air. Freya sidestepped, the sharp steel grazing the hem of her cloak, snow spraying like droplets of blood in the cold night. The hunters surged, the clearing erupting into chaos, the clash of weapons ringing sharp and cruel against the stillness of the forest. Freya fought not just for herself, but for the memory of Kára, for the child growing in secret beyond the borders of war. Her axe sang through the air, a deadly hymn of defiance, carving space where none should have existed. The berserker rage, tempered by the bitter tea and the fierce love still burning in her heart, became a storm unleashed upon those who sought to bind her. The Jarl's voice rose above the din, a cold command that sought to restore order. "Hold! This is not your place to decide with sword alone." But the lines had already blurred. Blade and blood spoke louder than words. Amid the turmoil, Freya's thoughts flashed to the cave where they had hidden, to the soft breath of Kára beside her, to the fragile promises made beneath a raging storm. The memory was a shield and a sword, reminding her of why she fought, not for glory or vengeance, but for a future beyond hatred. A sudden blow caught her side, knocking the wind from her lungs. Pain flared sharp and raw, but she gritted her teeth, planting her feet firmly in the snow. She twisted, bringing the haft of her axe down with brutal force onto the next warrior who advanced. The impact echoed through the trees, a thunderclap in the quiet night. The battle slowed as the Jarl pushed forward, flanked by his most loyal guards. His gaze locked with Freya's, an unspoken challenge passed between them, old as the ice and stone beneath their feet. "You have strength, Berserker," he said, voice low and grudging. "But strength without honor is a hollow thing." Freya's breath came ragged, but her eyes burned with fierce clarity. Honor is not blind obedience. It is the courage to choose what is right, even when the world demands otherwise. The Jarl's hand rested on the hilt of his sword, tension coiling like a serpent in his muscles. Around them, the warriors held their ground, awaiting his command. Then, unexpectedly, the Jarl spoke again. "You will come with me to the Great Hall. There, the council will hear your words, and I will decide whether the Raven clan's axe falls upon your head, or if your fate lies beyond our lands." Freya nodded slowly, the fight draining from her limbs as a different battle began, the one of words and judgment. The night's cold seeped back in, the fire in her chest tempered but still burning fierce. As she was bound and led through the snow, the last sight she caught was Astrid's steady gaze, a silent promise that she was not forgotten. Inside the great hall, the air was thick with the smoke of torches and the weight of expectation. The longhouse was filled with the clan's elders and warriors, their faces a tapestry of anger, fear, and curiosity. The carved wooden pillars, etched with the stories of ancestors, seemed to lean closer, bearing witness to this moment that would ripple through generations. The council's seats were heavy with history, each carved detail a reminder of the laws that held their world in precarious balance. Freya's hands were freed, but the scars and the rune brand marked her as an outcast. The murmurs rose and fell like the crash of distant waves, some voices laden with condemnation, others with reluctant respect. Jarl Gunnar sat at the head, his presence commanding silence. Bjorn loomed nearby, his eyes sharp and watchful. Freya stepped forward, her voice steady despite the weight pressing upon it. I stand before you not as a traitor, but as a woman who chose life over death, love over fear. I do not ask for forgiveness, only understanding. The hall held its breath. Whispers rippled like the wind, some scoffing, others moved by the unexpected grace in her words. And what of the woman you saved? One elder demanded. The bear healer who bears your secret? Freya's gaze did not waver. She carries life within her, a child born of this forbidden bond. Do you condemn the child as you condemn me? Will you deny the future for the sins of the past? A heavy silence followed. The question hung between them, colder than the winter winds outside. Jarl Gunnar's eyes darkened, the weight of his choice settling upon him. The clans have long been bound by blood and bloodshed. To break that chain is to break the world itself. But to break it is also to build anew, Freya replied softly. For hate breeds only ruin. Love, though painful and perilous, plants the roots of peace. The council murmured, some faces hardening, others softening. Bjorn's mouth twisted in a snarl, but even he could not deny the power in her words. The Jarl rose, his voice echoing through the hall. We will deliberate. Until the dawn, Freya Thordóttir remains in custody. Let the gods judge us all. As the longhouse emptied, Freya was led to a small chamber, the flickering torchlight casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. Alone, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, the weight of what had come and what was to come pressing down like the winter's frost. Outside, the clan's fires burned on, a fragile beacon against the endless night. The fate of a berserker, a healer, and the child they carried was no longer theirs alone to bear. The echoes of their defiance would ripple through the ages, whispered in the wind, carved into stone, and remembered by those who dared to hope for a world beyond war. In the stillness, Freya closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not for herself, but for the generations to come, for the love that had cost so much, and the peace that might one day bloom from its ashes. The heavy doors of the great hall creaked open once more, admitting a cold breath of dawn into the dim chamber. Outside, the first pale light of morning filtered through the frost-laden trees, casting long shadows that stretched across the snow-dusted earth. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the weight of countless eyes fixed on the figure who now returned, not as a prisoner, but as a bearer of truth. Freya Thordóttir stepped forward, her face marked by the harsh rune of exile and the scars of countless battles, yet her posture unyielding, her spirit undiminished. The council had convened again, summoned by the whispers that had spread beyond the clan's borders, rumors carried on the wind like fallen leaves. Whispers that told of a child born not just of two women, but of two worlds long divided by hatred and blood. The news had unsettled many, but it also stirred a current of curiosity and hope among those who had lived their lives bound by the endless cycle of vengeance. Freya's presence was met with a mixture of murmurs and guarded glances. The Jarl, Gunnar Sigurdsson, sat at the head, his features etched with the lines of age and the burden of leadership. His eyes, steely and unreadable, bore into her with a mixture of suspicion and something that flickered like reluctant respect. The longhouse felt smaller than before, as if the very walls held their breath, waiting for what was to come. Bjorn Halfdan stood nearby, his expression hard, the fire of jealousy and wrath still burning beneath his brow. Yet even he seemed momentarily silenced by the gravity of the moment. Freya's voice carried through the hall, steady and clear despite the cold that seemed to seep into her bones. I come not to beg forgiveness, nor to deny my choices. I stand before you with the truth, one that cannot be silenced by fear or scorn. She paused, letting the silence settle like a heavy cloak. Kára Olafsdóttir, the healer of the Bear clan, did not die in that forest because I chose to save her. She carries within her a child born of our bond, a living testament to the possibility of peace beyond the cycle of hatred. A ripple passed through the gathered warriors and elders. Some faces twisted in disbelief, others softened with a dawning understanding that seemed almost painful in its rarity. The murmurs grew. The room turned toward Astrid, the weight of her words pulling attention like a tide. The clans have been locked in rage for generations, she continued. But if we cannot find room for mercy, then we are doomed to the same endless war. Freya's exile was a harsh blow, but the blood she carries within her is not dishonor, it is a seed. Her words stirred something deep in the hearts of those assembled. The elders exchanged glances, the lines on their faces softening, memories of lost kin and broken futures stirring beneath the veil of tradition. Bjorn's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze dark. Yet even he seemed to falter, the certainty of his wrath challenged by the quiet power of truth. Jarl Gunnar rose slowly, the creak of his joints echoing through the hall. His voice was heavy with the gravity of years and battles fought, not just on the field, but within the hearts of his people. Freya Thordóttir, you have brought both shame and hope to our people. The bond you forged was forbidden, and the price has been paid in blood and exile. Yet, the child you speak of, will that be the legacy we leave behind? A sign that the old ways may yet give way to something new. Freya nodded, her gaze steady. Yes, the child carries our past, but also our future. It is a promise that the hatred between bear and raven need not be eternal. A long silence followed. The crackling of the fire and the faint drip of melting icicles outside were the only sounds. Then, one by one, voices began to rise, some cautious, some resolute, but all carrying the weight of years spent in conflict. An elder man, his face lined with age and wisdom, spoke next. Perhaps it is time to listen, not with ears clouded by fear, but with hearts open to what might be. A woman, her braided hair streaked with silver, added, "The gods test us not with ease, but with the courage to change. If this child is to live, then so too must we learn to bend." The air shifted, the heavy tension easing just slightly as the council began to glimpse a path beyond the darkness. The hard lines of tradition softened, not erased, but reformed by the strength of a love that refused to be hidden. Jarl Gunnar gazed at Freya, his eyes reflecting the flickering firelight. "You will not return as one condemned. The mark of exile shall be cleansed, and your place among the raven restored, not as before, but as a woman who dared to break the chains of hatred." The hall echoed with murmurs of surprise and quiet approval. Freya felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not because the path ahead would be easy, but because the first stones of reconciliation had been laid. Bjorn stepped forward reluctantly, his voice low but clear. "I cannot forget what has been broken, nor the laws that govern us. But I will not stand in the way of the clan's future. Let this be a turning point, not a fracture." The promise in his words was fragile, but genuine. Astrid approached Freya then, her expression softened by relief and solidarity. "You are no longer alone," she said, clasping Freya's arm firmly. "We will walk this path together." Outside, the winter sun climbed higher, the frost beginning to thaw beneath its steady light. The village stirred to life, the echoes of the council's decision rippling through the longhouses and across the snow. Freya stepped into the morning, the rune on her cheek fading with the dawn's first warmth, a symbol not of exile, but of survival and change. Her thoughts turned to Kára, to the child growing quietly in the Bear Clan's lands, carrying their shared legacy. Soon, they would be reunited, not as fugitives, but as the foundation of a new beginning. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges. Old wounds would take time to heal, and the scars of generations would not vanish overnight. But within the hearts of those who dared to hope, a fragile peace had taken root. Freya's exile had ended, but her journey was far from over. The love that had cost her everything had also given birth to a future where the raven and the bear might one day stand side by side, not as enemies, but as kin. And in that truth, the fire of a new era flickered, wild, fierce, and impossible to extinguish. The bitter winter had begun to loosen its grip on the land, and with the softening snow, a new breath stirred within the village of the Raven clan. The Palisades, once shadowed by suspicion and fear, now carried an unfamiliar weight, a whisper of change carried on the early spring winds. Fires burned steadily in the longhouses, their smoke rising into skies less heavy with frost, as if the air itself was beginning to thaw the cold that had settled deep in the hearts of the people. Freya Thordóttir moved through the village with a quiet grace that defied her fierce reputation. The rune of exile, once branded sharply into the flesh of her right cheek, had faded beneath the gentle hands of the clan's healers. It was no longer a mark of shame but a scar of survival, a reminder of the price paid for love and the strength that grew from it. Her red hair, still streaked with the ash of past battles, caught the light of dawn as she walked beside the wooden fences, greeting those who no longer turned away in silence or scorn. The longhouses thrummed with cautious whispers about the child born of forbidden union, a symbol neither fully accepted nor entirely rejected. It was said the child bore the mark of the bear alongside the wild fierceness of the raven, a living bridge between enemies, a fragile promise that peace could bloom where once only blood had been spilled. The elders had decreed that this child, born in secrecy and shadow, was to be protected, a seed of hope for all clans bound by strife. In the heart of the village, near the great oak that had witnessed countless seasons and battles, a circle of children played beneath the watchful eyes of their parents. Their laughter, light and free, seemed out of place against the backdrop of ancient grudges. Among them was a small child with hair like fallen autumn leaves, vivid red that caught the sun's rays with fiery brilliance, and eyes that held the calm depth of a forest pool. The mark of a bear's paw, faint but unmistakable, graced the child's shoulder, a silent testament to a lineage both feared and revered. Freya often found herself drawn to the clearing where the children played. Her gaze lingered on the young life that embodied the union she and Kára had forged against the currents of hatred. Though separated by distance and circumstance, her heart remained bound to the healer and the child who carried their shared legacy. The weight of exile had been lifted, but the road to true belonging was only just beginning. Astrid Gunhild's daughter, steadfast and loyal, had become more than a comrade. She was now a guardian of this fragile peace. The scars that marked her face and arms were badges of battles fought for both clan and conscience. Together, she and Freya navigated the uncertain terrain of acceptance, their friendship a steady anchor amid shifting tides. Astrid's presence in the village was a quiet defiance against old prejudices, a reminder that loyalty and courage could transcend even the deepest divides. Bjorn Halfdan, once fierce in his opposition to Freya's choices, had withdrawn into himself. His ambitions bruised, but not broken, he wrestled with the shifting landscape of power and tradition. Though his heart remained tangled in shadows of jealousy and regret, whispers suggested he was beginning to see the possibility of a future where strength was measured not only by the sword, but by the courage to change. The Jarl, Gunnar Sigurdsson, carried the weight of leadership with a solemn resolve. His weathered hands bore the marks of battles past, his gray eyes softened by the toll of time and wisdom. In the council chambers, the stories of Freya and Kára had become lessons etched in the minds of those who would guide the clan's fate. The old laws, once rigid as the frozen earth beneath their feet, now bent, slowly but undeniably, toward mercy and understanding. The village elders spoke cautiously of new traditions, that the bond between clans need not be forged only in bloodshed but could be nurtured through shared kinship and respect. Songs sung at the fire began to carry verses of hope and unity, weaving tales of a red-haired child born of love and defiance, a beacon for generations yet to come. In the quiet moments between dawn and dusk, Freya found herself standing at the edge of the forest where the shadow of the Bear clan met the Raven lands. The trees whispered ancient. As the seasons turned, the Raven and Bear clans found their borders less rigid, their disputes softened by the memory of what Freya and Kára had dared to defy. Trade between the clans resumed, tentative at first, but growing steadily with each passing moon. The exchange of goods brought with it the exchange of stories, and in those stories, the seeds of understanding took root. A new generation of warriors and healers emerged, some marked by the fire of the Berserker, others by the gentle art of medicine, each carrying the legacy of the past, yet reaching toward a future unshackled by hatred. The scars of old battles remained, like the wrinkles of the earth, but they served as reminders of endurance rather than division. In the flickering glow of a midsummer feast, the village gathered beneath the open sky, their faces lifted to the stars that had witnessed so much history. The air was thick with the mingled scents of roasted meat, pine smoke, and wildflowers. Songs filled the night, voices rising in unison to honor the ancestors and the promise of peace. Freya stood among her people, her axe resting at her side, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of survival and the battles fought within. Beside her, Astrid's steady presence was a balm to the wounds still healing. Their eyes met, sharing the quiet satisfaction of a road traveled through shadow and fire. In that moment, as the stars shone cold and distant above, Freya allowed herself to hope. The price she had paid was immense, the losses deep and raw. Yet from the ashes of betrayal and exile, a new story had begun, one of courage, love, and the unyielding power of the human spirit to forge bonds that even the oldest grudges could not sever. The legacy of Freya and Kára was more than a whispered tale. It was a beacon, a light passed from mother to child, from clan to clan, across the endless dawn of generations. In the hearts of those who dared to listen, it sang of a world where the raven and the bear could soar together, their wings beating the rhythm of peace. And so, beneath the endless sky, the story carried on, wild, fierce, and eternal. The long winter had passed, its icy grip gradually loosening with each rising sun. The village stirred beneath the soft light of early spring, and with it came a fragile breath of hope that seemed to breathe life into the weary souls who had endured so much. Freya Thordóttir moved among her people with a steadiness born from trials beyond measure. The rune etched in her skin, once a mark of exile and shame, had faded beneath the hands of the healers, becoming instead a quiet scar of survival. It was a reminder that pain could transform, that wounds, though deep, could knit back together. Her eyes often met those of the villagers, sometimes met with cautious nods of acceptance, other times with lingering shadows of doubt. Yet beneath the surface of their glances was a subtle shift, a softening that whispered of change. The story of Freya, the berserker who had defied the codes of clan and blood, was no longer just a tale of betrayal. It had become a symbol of what was possible when courage dared to challenge tradition. In the center of the village, the great oak tree stood sentinel, its broad limbs stretching skyward like the arms of the gods themselves. Beneath its watchful gaze, children played with the careless abandon of youth, their laughter a fragile melody against the backdrop of hardened lives. Among them was a small figure, her hair the fire of autumn embers, and her eyes calm pools of wisdom beyond her years. The mark of the bear was faint but unmistakable upon her shoulder, a silent testament to the union that had been forged in secret and struggle. This child, named Ira, carried within her the blood of two worlds long divided by hatred and war. She was the living bridge between the raven and the bear, the embodiment of a hope that was as wild and untamed as the lands they called home. Ira's presence was a quiet defiance against the past, a promise that the cycle of violence might one day end. Freya watched from afar, her heart both heavy and light. The weight of exile had been lifted, yet the journey toward true peace was only beginning. She thought often of Kára, the healer whose strength had saved more than just flesh and bone. Though distance and duty kept them apart, their bond endured in whispered letters and trusted messengers. It was a thread woven through the seasons, a lifeline of love that neither time nor hatred could sever. Astrid Gunhild's daughter remained ever at Freya's side, a constant presence in a world still shrouded in uncertainty. Her steadfast loyalty and fierce protection were balm to the scars that lingered beyond the skin, and together they forged a path through the uneasy peace. Where once suspicion and fear had ruled, now a cautious trust began to grow, fragile as new green shoots breaking through frozen earth. Bjorn Halfdan had receded into the shadows of the village, his ambitions bruised and tempered by the shifting tides of power. The fire of jealousy that once burned bright now simmered with a grudging acceptance, perhaps even a reluctant hope. The old ways, once so rigid and unyielding, were bending under the weight of truth and necessity. Jarl Gunnar Sigurdsson carried the burdens of leadership with a somber gravity. His eyes, once as cold and hard as winter ice, now held a glimmer of something softer. Wisdom shaped not just by battle, but by the harsh lessons of change. Within the council chambers, the stories of Freya and Kára were no longer whispers of shame, but chapters in the evolving saga of their people. The ancient laws that had ruled for centuries were bending, opening to the possibility of mercy, understanding, and renewal. Trade between the Raven and Bear clans slowly resumed, tentative at first, but growing stronger with each passing moon. The exchange of goods brought with it the exchange of stories, and in those stories, the seeds of a fragile peace took root. A new generation was coming, warriors and healers alike, carrying the legacy of the past, while reaching toward a future unshackled by hatred. Songs sung at the fire began to tell of love born amid war, of a red-haired child who carried the strength of the bear and the cunning of the raven. These tales wove through the night like threads of warmth, binding the hearts of those who dared to hope. In moments of quiet reflection, Freya found herself standing at the edge of the forest where the lands of the bear met those of the raven. The trees whispered ancient secrets, their branches swaying gently in a wind that carried both blessing and warning. Here, where once only silence and suspicion dwelled, she envisioned a world where paths crossed freely, where enemies might walk side by side as kin, and where old wounds could heal beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. Her thoughts drifted to the future, uncertain, yet bright with possibility. The weight of her sacrifice had been heavy, the cost steep. But in the heart of that sacrifice had blossomed a seed, small and fragile, yet full of promise. The legacy of Freya and Kára was no longer a secret whispered in the shadows, but a beacon illuminating a path forward. It was a testament to the unyielding power of love and the resilience of the human spirit to forge bonds that neither blood nor fear could sever. And so, beneath the endless sky where the raven soars and the bear roams, their story carried on, wild, fierce, and eternal. In the quiet spaces between the past and the future, one truth remained clear. Sometimes the greatest strength lies not in steel or fury, but in the courage to choose love over hate. It is a choice that echoes beyond the battlefield, through the hearts of generations yet to come. If this story has touched your soul, if the fire of that forbidden love has stirred something within you, join us on this journey. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stand with us as we bring to life the tales of Viking honor, sacrifice, and the enduring power of the human heart. Because in the end, it is not the sword that shapes history, but the choice is made in the quietest, fiercest moments of love and defiance. And as the raven takes flight against the fading light, remember, in a world bound by blood and battle, compassion can be the sharpest weapon of all.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.